have of bet.
Yeah.
If one consecrated his property and he was liable for his wife's ketubah or a debt to a creditor, his wife cannot collect her ketubah from temple property, nor can the creditor collect his debt from it. Rather, the one who redeems it on the condition of giving the wife her ketubah or the creditor his debt. If one consecrated property worth 90 manas and his debt was 100 manas, he adds another dinner and he redeems the property with it, on the condition of giving the wife her ketubah, on the creditor his debt. Although they said we secure payment from those obligated with Eric vows, we allowed him food for 30 days, clothing for 12 months, and a bed made up with bedding, shoes, and tefillin for himself, but not for his wife or his children. If he was a craftsman, we allow him 2 tools of each kind. The carpenter is given 2 planes and 2 saws. If Eliezer says if he was a plowman, they give him the yoke of his oxen, a donkey driver, and they give him his donkey. If he had many of one kind and few of another kind, we do not tell him to sell some of the many and to buy for himself some of the few. Rather, we give him 2 kinds of the many and whatever he has of the few. If one consecrates his property, they assess him for his tefillah. Okay.
Okay. Mishna hey, echad makdish es nechasa ve'echad marich es atzmo. So whether a person sanctifies his property or he gives an evaluation of himself, ein lo bichsus ishto v'lo bichsus banav. He cannot claim on the he cannot claim a reduction on sorry, I beg your pardon. The Gizbar cannot take from his wife's clothing or his children's clothing. We got to assess the man himself, not his family. So the debt is only on him. So remember, they have to assess him to see if he can actually afford to pay. If you can't afford, then they assess him at a low value. But they say, okay, so your wife is wearing all this jewelry and whatever, can't you sell that? And they say, no, that's off limits. That's his wife's. Mm-hmm. Okay. And even dyed wool that was made for them to make garments, even though it hasn't been made into a garment yet, it's not that's exempt. And also new shoes that haven't been finished. So even though we say that when we have slaves, you're allowed to basically embellish their value. You're allowed to make your slaves look better for the market. How? By putting them in good clothing, because marketing worked then as it does now. And if you're trying to sell a slave who's dressed in rags, he's not going to fetch the same price as the slave who's dressed in good clothing, because he just looks better. Okay, and it's more than just the price of the clothes that you're getting on them. Okay, if you just buy him 30 dinars worth of nice clothing, suddenly the price goes up by 100. Same with a cow. Like if you're taking it, if you want to take it to the butcher, okay, it's you can make it. What can you do with this cow? Let me just see what how Kahati puts this over here. If he waits until market day, when they sell the cows, then you can get a much better price for it than if you're selling it off season. Okay, on an off day. Okay, margalis, and similarly pearls in malinos lacroix. If you're sitting in a small village and you've got some valuable pearls, and now this is talking about the guy who's made a pledge to the sanctuary, and they're coming to assess his value. And he's got these pearls, he's got a cow, he's got slaves, whatever it is. So they say, so the Gizbar wants to say to him, look, if you wait until market day, you'll get a good price for this cow. If you wait until market day and take these pearls to the big city, you'll get a better price for them, and therefore I can assess you as being richer than you are at the moment. The Gizbar has no right to assess him at a higher rate just because he's got things that could be worth more if he just invested a little in them. He can only look at the price as it is right now, and that's how he assesses the person's worth.
You said before that the shoes, even though they're not completed yet, but the commentary says here that the shoes or clothing are considered the property of the wife or children as soon as they are bought, even if they have not been worn yet.
Oh, even if they've not been worn. Okay, thank you for the correction. Okay. All right. So Perek Zion, we move into the subject of redemption of fields. So we need to give a little background to this chapter. So we have a section in the Torah that talks about if a person dedicates his field to the Mikdash. Okay. Now this is one of the cases where a person can actually lose their inherited field if they've donated it to the Mikdash and they fail to redeem it before the Yovel, because then in the Yovel they lose it goes out of their ancestral possession and goes into the hands of the Kohanim who are on duty at the time of the Yovel.
Okay.
Okay. So how does this all work? So we're going to deal with an ancestral field versus a purchased field. There's a different halacha for each one of them. But let's say we're talking about an ancestral field. So if a person dedicates his field in the year after the Yovel, so he's got another 49 years to redeem it. Okay, and depending on how, and the Torah tells us that the way it's worked out is that the full purchase price of the field is 50 shekels in Torah terms, or 50 selah in Mishnah terms, is per base core. So I mean the details of how big is it? It's approximately 274 amas squared.
Okay.
Okay, whatever it is, it's called the base core, and which is the amount of area that you can sow a core of seeds in. Okay, that's 30 se'ah. So this base core, sorry, is it a base? Yeah, it's a base. Just make sure that I'm using the right term. Hold on a second. I'm just suddenly doubting myself. Yeah, base core. Okay. So for every base core in the field, he is a price of 50 shekels, but that gets reduced proportionately for every year as you get towards the Yovel. Okay. Now, so that means you got a 50 divided by 49 years, which means that it's 1 and a bit every year. Right. And that bit is a pundion. Now, a pundion actually is 1/48th of a selah, but they rounded up to a full pundion because when a money changer changes your seller into changes your pundionim into a seller, he takes 49 because one of them is his exchange fee. So we say it's going to take it. So the fee per year is a seller and a pundion. Okay, so if he's got 20 years left on his field before the Yovel, then he pays 20 seller and 20 pundionim, and then he can redeem his field. Okay. Plus, if it's his own field, he also has to pay the chomesh.
Right. Okay.
He has to pay chomesh on top of it. Okay. Kacha. Now that's if it's his field in during a normal thing. But there's a little tweak in the rules over here, because it says begira on shanim, and it's talking in the plural. That only works until there are 2 years left. Once there are less than 2 years left, now you don't have a plural, so there's a sudden spike in how much he has to pay. He has to pay the full 50, not the pro rata amount. And there's a certain kind of logic which I can see to that, which is that if he doesn't pay up in the next year, he's going to lose the field forever. So now he's actually getting back the entire field by doing this, and therefore it's you can see why he would have to pay the full 50. There's a certain logic, even though it's a gezeres HaKasav, you can see there's a certain tzedek in that. Anyway, so let's dive into the Mishnah now. You cannot consecrate your field less than 2 years before the Yovel, because that's basically giving it away, because you're not going to be able to redeem it properly. Okay, so that's ineffective. And if he dedicates his field immediately after the Yovel, he can't redeem it immediately. He's got to wait at least a year to give the hekdesh some benefit from it. Okay, we don't calculate months in terms of hectares. We don't say, okay, let's prorata this because it's now it's let's say we're down to 20 years and a few months. So let's say
Right.
6 months. So it's 6 months into so it's 19 and a half years. So now the guy wants to say, okay, so let me give 19 and a half seller and 19 and a half pundionim. He said, no, it's the full 20. Round up. You got to give the temple the full 20, unless it comes down to the situation where it's about so en mechashvin chodashim lehekdesh aval hahekdesh mechashev chodashim. But when it's in hektesh's advantage to count the months, then it does, which is in the case of 2 years, right? If it's exactly 2 years, then he only has to pay 2 sela and 2 pundionim. But if it's 1.5 years, so had it been 2.5 years, we would have rounded it up to 3. But if we take it 1.5 years and round it up to 2, then the owner has the advantage because now he only has to pay 2 seller. Whereas if he rounded down to 1, then he has to pay 50. So that's what I just explained over there. That's the edge case where you've got less than a plural, and therefore hekdesh always has the advantage. Okay. Hamakdish es sadehu b'shasa yovel. So if somebody dedicates his field in the time when the yovel is in effect, which it isn't unfortunately anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, but dealing in those times, nosein bezera chomer seorim 50 shekel kesef. So this finally states out our rule that I said earlier, that for every base core of land, he has to pay 50 shekels. 50 shekels of silver, which is 50 sela. Okay. Now, what happens if the field is not all flat? If it's got ditches that are 10 tvachim deep, which makes them basically a neurashus, or there are rocks that are higher than 10 tvachim, which makes them basically part of a separate rishus, and it's unsuitable for farming. By the way, a commentary says that the ditches need to be filled with water to be not counted. Okay, then then you cannot count those as part of the field value. Then that's the field is smaller than it really seems. Okay, pachos mikan nimdadim imah. But if they're not so big, if the rock is less than 10 tvachim or the ditches are not as deep as 10 tvachim, then it's considered part of the field. We've seen that in other places where we were selling fields. In one of the bavas, when we were talking about selling fields. If I'm selling you a base core, it's exactly the same din. That if the ditches are too deep, then we don't count it as part of the field, and he's got to give him more land. Okay. Hikdisha shtaim or shalosh shanim lifnei yovel. Now, what happens if he's makdish 2 or 3 years before yovel? Nosen sela upundion l'shana. Then he must give a sela and a punyan for every year that's outstanding in order to redeem it. Imamar hareini nosen dava shana b'shana. If he says, look, I want to redeem it, but I can't afford the whole amount right now, let me do it in installments. Ein shomin lo, not acceptable. Ela nosen es kulo keechad. He has to pay the whole redemption in one installment. Yeah. Mishna base. Now, this applies echad abalim echad kol adam, and it doesn't matter who's doing the redemption, whether it's the owner, the original owner, or one of his friends, family, somebody else who wants to get the field back from hekdesh and wants to redeem it. They do the same cheshbon on this field. Ma bein abalim lebein kol adam. What's the difference whether it's the balim who redeems it or somebody else? Only the balim has to pay the extra fifth. But anyone else who wants to come and redeem it, they just pay the flat price without adding on a chomesh. Okay. All right. Base.
Oh, easy. Hey.
Base.
Right.
Arachin base.
Oh, we do not make less than 4 intercalculated months in a year, and it does not appear correct to make more than 8. The 2 loaves are eaten not less than 2 days after baking, nor more than 3 days afterwards. Parna breads are eaten not less than 9 days after baking, nor more than 11 days afterwards. An infant is circumcised not less than 8 days old, nor more than 12. We do not blow less than 21 trumpets less in the temple, nor than 48. We do not use less than 2 lyres, no more than 6. We do not use less than 2 flutes, no more than 12. On 12 days during the year, the flute plays before the altar, during the slaughtering of the first Pesach offering, and during the slaughtering of the Pesach offering, and on the first Yom Tov of Pesach, and on the Yom Tov of Shavuot, on the 8 days of the festival. And he would not play a copper flute, but a reed flute, because its sound is pleasant. And he would conclude with only a single flute, because it would make it for better clothes. They were the slaves of the Kohanim. These are the words of Rameh. The word Roshi says these were the families of base of Hagirim and base Tapora, and from Emuma, from which Kohanim married. Reb Hanina ben Atigano says they were Levites.
Okay. Back to Chulin. Tesches.
Yes. The dangling limb and flesh of a man are tahor. The man who dies, the flesh is tahor. The limb conveys tuma as a limb severed from a living person, but it does not convey tuma as a limb of a corpse. These are the words of Reb Meir, but Reb Shimon declares it tahor. The mitzvah of giving the four-leg, the jaws, and the more apply both in the land and outside the land, when the temple exists and when the temple does not exist, and to unconsecrated animals, but not to consecrated animals. For it might have been argued, if it consecrated animals which are not subject to the requirement to give the breast and the thigh are subject to the requirement to give the gifts, then consecrated animals which are subject to the requirement to give the breast and the thigh, is it not logical that they be subject to the requirement to give the gifts? Therefore, Scripture states, I have given them to Aaron and the Kohen and his sons for an everlasting right. He has only what is mentioned in this section. All consecrated animals had a permanent blemish prior to their consecration, and they were redeemed, and they are subject to the law of Bachor and the gifts through the Kohanim, and they revert to mundane status, even to the extent that they may be shorn and put to work. And their offspring and the milk are permissible after their redemption. And one who slaughters them outside the temple court is not liable. And they do not affect Tamora, and if they died prior to their redemption, they may be redeemed, except for the Bakor offering and the Masa offering. All animals of consecration preceded their blemish, or whose temporary blemish preceded their consecration, and only after their consecration did they develop the permanent blemish, and they were redeemed. They are exempt from the law of Bakor and the gifts to the Kohen, and they do not revert to mundane status to the extent of being permitted to be shorn and put to work, and their offspring and the milk are prohibited. After their redemption, one who slaughters them outside the temple cure are less liable, and they affect Tamura, and if they die, they must be buried.
Yeah. Okay. Next. Orios.
If he ruled independently and acted independently, he is atoned for it independently. If he ruled with the community and acted with the community, he is atoned for with the community. For the court is not liable unless it rules to abolish part and to retain part, and so too the anointed Kohen, and neither are they liable with regard to idolatry unless they rule to abolish part and retain part. They are not liable except for the oversight of something along with an inadvertent act, and so too the anointed Kohen. Neither are they liable for idolatry except for the oversight of something along with an inadvertent act. The court is not liable unless it rules on a matter which is punishable by charis or willful transgression, and by a sin offering for inadvertent transgression, and so too for the anointed Kohen. Neither are they liable for idolatry unless they rule on a matter which is punishable by charis or willful transgression, and a sin offering for inadvertent transgression. They are not liable for the positive commandment or the negative commandment concerning the temple, and they do not bring it a shamtula to the positive commandment or the negative commandment concerning the temple. But they are liable with respect to the positive commandment and the negative commandment concerning the menstruate, and they bring an ashram tuli for the positive commandment and the negative commandment concerning the menstruate. What is the positive commandment concerning the menstruate? Separate for the menstruate, and the negative command do not cohabitate with the menstruate. Okay.
Kiddushin.
Okay. The rites of smicha, raving, bringing clothes, chametza, burning, malika, sprinkling, and receiving pertain to man and not to women, except for the meal offering of a sota and a female Nazarite, in which cases they waive them. Every commandment which is dependent on land applies only in the land, and that which is not dependent on land applies both in the land and outside the land, except for Orla and Kalayim. And Rabbi Eliezer says also Kadash. Whoever fulfills one commandment is benefited. His days are prolonged and he inherits the land. And whoever does not fulfill one commandment is not benefited. His days are not prolonged and he does not inherit the land. Whoever is involved in the study of scripture and Mishna and conducts himself properly will not easily sin. As it is said, three-ply cord is not easily severed. And whoever is involved neither in the study of scripture nor Mishna and does not conduct himself properly is not part of civilization.
Okay. Done.
And we are on to Shabbos. Shabbos, correct?
Yeah, Shabbos, space.
Okay. Anything that was put in hot water before Shabbos may be soaked in hot water on Shabbos. But anything that was not put in hot water before Sabbath may be rinsed in hot water on the Sabbath, except for an old salted fish, small salted fish, or Spanish mackerel, because their rinsing completes their preparation.
So this is the source of kale habishal, when you've got things that are easily cooked and that you can't even put in a kli sheni. It has to be in a kli shlishi.
A person may break open a cask to eat dried figs from it, provided that he does not intend to make a vessel. We may not perforate the bung of a cask. Now these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. The sages, however, permit it, but one may not perforate it on its side. If one was perforated, one may not place was upon it because he smooths it. Said Rabbi Yehuda, and Nitzan came before Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Arav, and he said, I fear on his account that he may be liable for a sin offering. We may place a cooked dish in a pit in order that it be preserved, good water and stale water in order that it cool off, and cold water in the sun in order that it become warm. One whose garments fell into the water while traveling may continue to walk in them, and he need not fear. When he arrives at the outer courtyard, he may spread them out in the sun, but not in front of people.
Okay.
One,
Taurus Yud Hey.
One who eats grapes taken from baskets or from an expanse on the ground, even if the grapes are cracked and the juice is dripping onto the winepress is tahor. If the grapes are from a bucket or from an expanse of leaves, or a single grape fell into the winepress, if the grape has a seal, the winepress is tahor. If it does not have a seal, the winepress is tummy. If a cluster of grapes fell from him and he pressed them into an empty place on the winepress, if the cluster consists of precisely the volume of an egg, the winepress is tahor. And if the cluster consists of more than a volume of an egg, the winepress is tamei, for as soon as the first drop of juice came out, it was rendered tamei by the volume of an egg. If someone was standing and talking on the rim of a pit of wine, and saliva spread out of his mouth, and there was doubt whether the saliva reached the pit or did not reach it, the uncertainty is ruled tahor. Regarding one who was emptying a pit and a sheretz was found in the first barrel, all the barrels are tamei, and if it was found in the last barrel, that barrel is tamei, and all the others are tahor. When is this? When he empties the pit using his barrel. But if he empties the pit with a dipper, if the sheretz was found in one of the barrels, that one alone is tamei. And when is this? When he checks the barrels but does not cover them, or he covers them but does not check them. But if he checks the barrels and he covers them, and the sheretz was found in the barrel, everything is tamei. If the sheretz was found in a pit, everything is tamei, and if it was found in the ladle, everything is tamei.
Right. So we try and give the benefit of doubt. If it's possible to explain away. Oh, lost you. Okay. Well, if we have any benefit of doubt, then we try and make it tahor. But if there's no other explanation, then it is tamei.